Hi, my name is Jordan Thorpe, and I'm an analyst at Compass Capital Management. I participated in the CFA Research Challenge a few years ago, and I am currently serving as the secretary on the CFA Society of Minnesota's Board of Directors. I have with me Miss Evelyn Currie, who participated in the Research Challenge this past year. I will let her introduce herself now.
Yeah, I'm Evelyn. I just graduated from the University of Minnesota. I was a finance major and an accounting minor, and I participated in the research challenge from last fall up until this last February.
Perfect. Thank you for coming and speaking with us today. We appreciate it. Just walk me through how your team kind of divided responsibilities. Who owned what sections of the report, and how did you figure that out?
That's a really good question. I think what helped is our team had a mix of different people and different majors as well as different years. So we kind of divided up the work based on what we felt we were most confident with doing. I was a senior, and so I was had taken some of those upper level finance classes. So me and another one of my teammates kind of took the brunt end of doing all the finance work, and then some of the other people in our group were better at putting together the actual paper and making it look nice. So they took on a lot of that work as well as just the overall business overview and research on that end.
How did you structure your research process from initial company assignment to final submission?
It was a long, windy road. We kind of bounced back and forth a lot. I will say you can fall down some rabbit holes when you're doing the research. And so making sure that we were always kind of on track with the deadlines that we made for ourselves and ensuring that we were getting them done was really helpful with, getting from the beginning of the process to the end of it. And then also relying on our mentor with, finding out what exactly we need to be researching, not just about the company, but about what's going on outside in the economy today as well.
And did you use any resources to help you do that? Or did you just kind of Google things and figure it out along the way?
Well, I actually used a lot of our library resources. I kind of had like a helpful edge. I used to work at the library on campus. And so I talked to some of the librarians and I said, this is kind of the research that I'm doing. Do you have databases that you think would be helpful for this? Or do you know someone who maybe is in charge of this area of research? So that was really helpful for us with finding different resources and not just Googling what is the stock price and what is it going to be.
How much time did the team collectively invest over the course of the competition, if you had to guess?
A lot of time. I'd say we probably collectively spent 5 hours each week ourselves, over the course of 5 months. So, 15 times five, a lot of hours, at least a couple hundred hours.
And do you think those hours were put to good use? Did you find some efficiencies kind of later on down the line? How did
Yeah.
that look for your team?
Sorry, I did not mean to interrupt your question there.
Oh, you're
Um,
okay.
It we definitely got better at it the more that we were, the farther along that we got. But it was a lot of time, and I'd like to think that we spent it wisely. We kind of walked out of it with so much information about this company and the whole process of learning everything. There is some trial and error to it, I will say. It's not like we, first day immediately had everything in order and we knew exactly what we were doing every single day for the next few months. It was, a learning process. And I think just having, often meeting with each other really helped just kind of keep things going right.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if you knew everything right off the bat and were able to just hit the ground running. I don't think that has been anybody's experience with the research
No,
challenge.
I'd like to say we didn't know anything actually at the beginning,
And now you do.
and now we do. Exactly.
What data sources and tools did you rely on most heavily?
Definitely the library research resources that I talked about. We used IBIS World and a lot of industry reports, Statista, and finding reports through that way. I also started cracking open some of my old textbooks too and was going through that and trying to figure out, the best way to be valuing an entire company. Because I think in classroom, you learn the bits and pieces to it, but doing the entire project from start to finish wasn't a project that I've ever taken on, and I know my teammates have never taken on. And so I also really relied on some of my schoolwork and some of my previous professors as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. I know like some schools, I went to UMD, like up there we had FactSet and Bloomberg. Does your school, did you have any of that or did you have to
Yes.
get really
Yeah.
creative with some of your sources?
I forgot about this one source. We use Capital IQ a
Oh,
lot.
perfect.
It's like kind of similar to Bloomberg in the sense. So that's
Mhm.
what we use. We do have access to those resources. You just have to go through the library to use them.
We did too. That makes complete sense.
Yeah.
What valuation methodologies did you use and which did you weight most heavily in your final recommendation?
We used both a DCF and a peer comparables as well. We looked at precedent transactions as well, but that one didn't end up being weighted in our final price just because we didn't feel that the peer group was a good enough fit to be weighing anything on that price. The biggest weight that we had was actually on our DCF model, just because the company that we were researching kind of spanned multiple different industries, and it was like a mix of different areas that they operated in. And so pulling together a publicly traded peer list that accurately reflected how this business was operating was super it was pretty nitpicky. So we
Mhm.
ended up doing a sum of the parts approach for that. So we found a list of companies for each of the different areas that the company operated in, and then we split up our like research companies metrics and then divided it based on that. But our final price had a pretty high weight on the DCF rather than the pure analysis.
That makes sense. And there's a lot of assumptions that goes like into a DCF. What do you think were some of your more significant assumptions and how did you stress test those?
The biggest assumptions are definitely the top line ones. So, how much you're growing revenue, how much you're growing the margins, if you're keeping them the same. And so, an approach that we took was we ran a Monte Carlo simulation. And so, we switched up the different inputs that we were doing and assumptions we were making and had it within a range that we felt comfortable with. And then we used that, dispersion of prices that it generated and kind of used that to figure that one out.
Perfect. Sounds like you did it right.
Yeah, there are so many assumptions though. It's a sensitive model. I mean, you can put in an assumption and it'll change it entirely, just a small percentage. So, the research behind that and the decisions that we were making were pretty hefty on the final price.
They would have to be like really,
Yeah.
really well vetted.
Yeah.
Did your thesis change materially between your first draft and your final submission? And if so, what kind of drove that shift?
It did. It changed quite a lot. We originally started off as a buy, and that was kind of before we got too deep into the financial analysis. We were doing more of just like the business overview, the industry overview, and also getting to interact with the company because we had an analyst day where we were able to go and meet some of the C suite that actually worked at the company, which was a really cool experience. But we originally started off as a buy, and then as we continued our financial analysis, we realized that there was a mismatch between the two. And so then we kind of had to dig in a little bit deeper and see, okay, what are the assumptions that are driving this buy idea for the business? And then what are the assumptions behind the finance that's not necessarily matching up to the business side of things?
Mhm. That makes sense. And that analyst day was very informative. I was able to go and there was a lot of information that they provided. So always happy when a company agrees to do
Mhm.
that.
And we got to play pickleball. That was awesome.
Doesn't get much better than that.
No.
You mentioned before that there were some gaps in the peer group competitor analysis. So how did you kind of handle some of those gaps in the publicly available information?
It was a lot of research and just learning more and more and more about different competitors that we felt were somewhat of an accurate match. And so again, that's why we took that sum of the parts approach by weighting the different, industry analysis between each different peer group.
How did you prepare for the analyst Q&A, and what were some of the hardest questions that you faced from the judges?
We kind of came at it with the idea that they were going to ask the questions where we felt most, uncertain in our analysis, which isn't the case. I think we could have done a better preparation by understanding that the analysts have not been by our side throughout this entire research project, and they're only just getting the 10 minutes. And even more so, they're not professors, they're, industry professionals. So they're going to ask questions that are more related to portfolio management, whether besides asking questions like, what exactly was, your inputs into the WACC, and why did you give the debt this rate and the equity this rate? It was more so questions that were like, if you were a portfolio management, on a portfolio management team, why or why not would you invest in this company? And so I think switching your brain to not come from this is a question a professor would ask me doing, a project in class, and more towards, perspective of, these are industry professionals and they're going to be asking questions that are more related to the actual work rather than the research kind of side of it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think another way of kind of saying it is they're going to be trying to understand what's driving your assumptions behind your overall recommendation, but having those individual pieces and knowing how to answer some of those more in-depth questions can help you kind of simplify things for what they're actually asking.
Yes, exactly.
Perfect. And then what feedback did the judges give you, like after you were answering some of those questions, and what surprised you most about it?
We got back a piece of paper or a PDF from each of the judges of the score sheet that they filled out. And they all included, comments for each individual section of the presentation. And I will say one part that surprised us is there was an area where we felt was more of a weak spot for us, but for the judges, we weren't docked as many points as we thought we would be. And it was actually another area of our presentation that could have been stronger, that the judges kind of poked holes in, that maybe we just didn't have the perspective on at the beginning.
Do you remember what those areas were? And if so, do you feel comfortable sharing that?
Yeah, of course. I thought our, weakest point was the actual presentation. So our slides and our speaking and, sharing the information. We all thought that that's where we kind of faltered the most. But the actual part that needed a little bit more backing was the finance side and the risk side with it, because they were asking some really in-depth questions, and we didn't necessarily have the best appendix to back up some of those questions. And so that's where we kind of fell a little flat with that.
Got it. That makes sense. Yes, having a very in-depth appendix can be super helpful in those
Yeah.
scenarios. So I guess
And
last
now I
question.
know.
Now you know.
Now I know.
Last question kind of in this like little category here. How did you manage nerves and team dynamics on presentation day? You mentioned, you were nervous about this one area that you weren't prepared for. So that's going to make you nervous when you're up there and everyone's eyes are on you. How do you kind of manage through that?
I was so nervous. I get so nervous with public speaking, especially. I'm, a very finance analytical person, and giving the presentation is a completely different side of this project. And something that honestly really helped me, be able to go up there was I just kept reminding myself what a great opportunity this was. I mean, I had never been able to do something like this throughout all of my educational years, being able to go up in front of a panel of industry professionals and state my case and share my claim. And so just reminding myself that I was just lucky and excited to be there really helped settle my nerves and kind of just shift my perspective on that, because it's nerve-wracking. It's a very professional business setting. These are people who are so have succeeded so well in their careers, and they're not to say more advanced than us, but they're definitely farther along in their careers, and we're just college students who will soon be graduating and entering this field. So it's nerve-wracking, it's scary. And so I think, also leaning on my team members and knowing that it was a shared experience. Thankfully it wasn't just me up there. I had four other people who I had just spent the last 5 months with working together, and so I felt comfortable because I had them by my side up there.
Well said. How far did your team advance in the Minnesota Regional? Did you compete at the local, regional, or national level? And kind of what was that overall experience like for you and your team?
We competed at the local presentation. We submitted the paper, and I believe there were around 15, 17 papers submitted. And from there, 6 teams got to advance. We were one of the teams that got to advance to the local finals and do the presentation.
That's wonderful. Did you learn a lot from like the judges when they were judging your papers in order to, prepare for the local presentations?
Yeah, the nice thing is that we had quite a few judges give feedback on the papers, and what was really helpful was quite a few of them pointed at very specific points and said, "This is a weak point in your argument, and this is where you need to strengthen it." And so it was really nice to be able to take that and say, "Okay, we need to apply this into our presentation because this is a point of the research project that they are, actively looking at and wanting it to be stronger." So then we were kind of able to adjust based off of the feedback that we got.
That's great. I know a lot of teams when they're originally going into it may think, "Oh, I turn my paper in and I'm done. If I get to present, I just present on the work." But there is quite a bit of work that happens between the paper and the actual presentation itself. So thank you for sharing. I appreciate that.
Yeah. I would even say that the work between the paper and the presentation was more intense and more rigorous than all of the paper work itself. That 2 3 week gap in between the paper and the presentation, it was intense, and I learned a lot from it. But it was a quick turnaround to switch it up and get it in a presentation form.
For us too, back in the day, I remember being stuck in a lot of different classrooms on campus till late in the morning, just going over the exact same thing over and over and over again to try and
Yeah.
make the presentation perfect.
Yeah, well, I also think there's a pretty big difference between it because you have the paper and you've got quite a few pages and
Mhm.
tons of time and space on the paper to share every single argument that you have. But for the presentation, you have to condense that all down into 10 minutes, and trying to figure out what's the most important thing that we get across was kind of an area that we struggled in a little bit. And so leaning on our mentors and was really helpful for that.
Especially because the presentation judges are not the same ones that are looking at your paper. So you need to make sure that the story and the detail gets across, but in a very effective and simplistic manner.
Yes, exactly.
What would you do differently if you ran the process again? If you were to say, okay, this year I'm going to be able to do it again, and the CFA Institute and the society actually let you do it again, what would you do differently and why?
Well, I will say if I could do it again, I would take the opportunity to do it again. I'm sure me and my team would agree there'd be a couple things that we would have done differently. We probably would have started a little bit earlier. When you're first starting that paper and the research, there are a couple months ahead of you, and it seems like there is plenty of time to get things done. The next thing you know, when you start putting together that paper, there is a lot more work that goes into it. I mean, just the formatting alone of our paper took so much time because we had to make sure that everything was lined up correctly, all of our graphs fit. It's, the question of, do we put this graph? Do we put that graph? Putting together the entire appendix for the paper as well, and going back through and finding everything that you researched and all the sources that you used and putting that into the paper. We should have started a little bit sooner on that. And then I'll say for the presentation, we we did have a technical malfunction. So I wish we would have, double, triple, quadruple checked our slides when I turned them in, because when we were going through our presentation, some of the formatting on the slides was off and it was lost. And that wasn't the most helpful because it was our DCF, and it was kind of the backbone of our financial valuation. However, the good thing I will say about that is even if you do have technical difficulties, if you know what you're talking about, if you know your slides, and if you know all this work and all the assumptions that you've put into it, you'll be able to get through it fine.
Well said. Definitely agree. Double checking formatting, spelling, making sure all the graphs are in the order that you want them, in the order that you're referencing them, all of those things. It takes a lot more time than anybody realizes,
Yeah.
even now.
Yeah. And it's so important too. I mean, thankfully we didn't have any typos in our paper, but I'm sure if you're, submitting this huge project, this huge paper, and there's typos in it, that starts to, kind of contradict you where you're standing from, and not the best look.
Absolutely. I mean, I've been a paper judge for years at this point, and if I see typos start to pop up more and more frequently, suddenly I'm questioning, okay, if you're not putting the level of detail into making sure there's not a typo, how do I trust the level of detail of anything else that you're saying? And I start
Exactly.
looking at
Yeah.
it much more critically because
Hmm.
if you can't spell can or and correctly, how can you do the DCF the right way?
Hmm. Yeah. It's questioning the validity of it. And I totally agree.
Mhm. What was the single most valuable thing you took away from the entire experience and why?
That is such a hard question. I think the most valuable thing that I took away, and that's hard to say because I could sit here for a very long time and talk about all the valuable things that I gained from this research project. But for me personally, outside of it, I was going through my recruitment processes for full-time hire, and I was actively doing multiple interviews, and every single question that I was asked in an interview, I could have answered with something that I did in the CFA Research Challenge.
Mhm.
Every single question. And I didn't. I didn't answer every question with the research challenge, but I could have because there is just so much real world experience that you gain from it. And it was incredibly helpful during that time to, kind of share a project that I was actively working on.
I can second that. I remember going through all of my interview processes and I could have answered the same thing. And I even remember in some of them I would just change the language instead of referencing the CFA Research Challenge, a project I was working on or something instead so I could
Yeah.
use that specific example because it really does give you that much value. And at the end of the day, it gives you something tangible to take into an interview as well.
Mhm. Yeah, it was an incredible experience, and I'm glad I kind of get to revisit it right now because I haven't thought about it as much recently, and it was such a good experience. Everyone on that team I'm now really close friends with. I see them often, and we had that shared experience, and it was incredible. It was a really great experience. Regardless of outcomes, we didn't go, abroad and win the whole thing, but it was just such a good experience.
Well, that's what we love to hear. And if you're really missing it that much, revisit with me in January, and I'd love to have you be a paper judge as well.
I would love to. I would never say no to that.
Perfect. I like to hear that as well. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jordan.